open to them. So finding ways in which your values are easily articulated and become the default behavior in your company, I think that's the most important thing. And it's going to be different for different companies. And of course, founders have an outsized part in setting those values from the start. And we happen to be a company that's still led by founders who are the CEOs. And a lot of our values, you can see, are very much derivatives of the founders. And for early stage companies, for young companies, I think that shows up even more with founders leading from the front, where their values really translate into company values, whether you like it or not. A lot of it really just comes through. So figuring out how to make that into a mechanism, into behaviors that employees espouse is going to be unique for every company. Tactically, one thing that's helped us as we have scaled to kind of keep the same culture, to keep the same values and hold the same bar is we do something called a values fit interview, which is quite unique to Atlassian. Lots of companies do culture fit interviews, but in general, our belief is that culture is not going to stay constant, but the values are going to stay constant. So we look for people who have values of openness, who value collaboration while delivering outcomes. And tactically, those kinds of moves are going to get more important as you grow as a company.
So we get asked these questions a lot. How do you screen for things like that? Like in a values-based interview, what are the indicators? Is it they tell stories and you look for evidence of that? So help us understand how you actually assess if those things are present versus, oh yeah, I'm really open, I'm very collaborative.
Yeah, so typically what I do, because I spend a lot of my time hiring, and these are personal tips that I use, and the answer might look different based on who you ask. But things that have been helpful for me is really to ask about their experiences in an open-ended way. For instance, if I'm looking for openness in a candidate, I tend to ask them, so what's the best thing about working for you and what's the worst thing about working for you? If I ask somebody on your team, what are they going to say? A lot of candidates typically dress that up as, well, the worst thing is I hold a high bar, so all my team might think that I hold a very high bar, and so it's hard to work for me. But candidates who really believe in openness are thoughtful and think about what do other people perceive them as? How can they bring empathy into this situation and say, here is how I'm perceived and this is what I did to work on it. And several people say, well, it's not yet work. I still find that that's an area where I'm working on getting better or working on changing perception. And the approach with which they answer is pretty transparent. So it's unlike the questions that you can prep for, where you say, why are you joining this company? You can kind of prep a great looking answer for it. But open-ended questions about the candidate's experience in the past and why they made those decisions. For instance, you meet people who had meandering journeys in their career. When you ask them to explain why, that very much shows how they live their values or how they make decisions. What are the first order bits, second order bits they consider in making those decisions? So those categories of questions have been helpful for me.